into the three chapters really that I've not been as excited about because they're just really challenging chapters. But we're going to dive into them tonight. So let's read here. We're going to read the entire chapter, okay? All 17 verses. Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, whereas she hath a place prepared of God, and they should feed her 1,260 days. Verse 7, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto their death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. When the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and a half time from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. All right. I was doing some study, and in his doctrinal dissertation, Thomas Ice wrote this little quote that I put at the top of our notes. Revelation 12 is said by some to be the most symbolic chapter in the most symbolic book in the New Testament. There's no doubt that of all the chapters that I have labored through to fulfill an outline and to try to fully grasp, chapter 12 has been one of the most challenging thus far. You look back at previous chapters, and while things can be symbolic and are symbolic in some senses, oftentimes you have the thing that you see in chapter 4. If you remember in chapter 4, and even in the early chapters, the elder would say to John, what is this that's happened? And John would say, I don't know. And he would say, let me tell you. Right? And so God providentially explains much of what happens in the early part of the book of Revelation. But when we get into chapter 12 and 13 and 14, it's just more challenging. Now, that being said, it ought not shake your faith at all. Just because you don't understand it, just because you can't necessarily describe it or explain it all, and you can't dogmatically, with 100% certainty say this is what this is, it doesn't mean that God's any less sovereign. It doesn't mean that the end times aren't any less certain. right? So just because we look at a chapter like chapter 12 and chapter 13 when we get to it next week, and there are some things where we just go, it might be this, it might be this. We don't know. That's a challenge. It shouldn't shake your faith any. We don't need to be any less certain that God is sovereign, He's omnipotent, He's omniscient, and that He is ultimately going to lead captivity. He has led captivity captive, and He is ultimately going to cast death and hell in the lake of fire, and He will be victorious. So let's just start here. How do we approach this text? This is where, as we get into these chapters, really 12 through 14, but even into chapter 16 a little bit, all bets are off. I mean, you hear all of the ideas. And some of them make perfect sense, and some of them you go, that could be logical. And some of them you go, what in the world? Like, what was this guy thinking? As a matter of fact, people who are doctrinally sound approach this passage and they diverge on what do some of these things mean. For example, we'll get into it in a minute, but I wrote down a few approaches here. Some people approach it as a historical thing. All these things have happened already. These are things that have already happened. And some people approach it from a symbolic sense. Well, none of these things are all just symbols or analogies for other things. I stumbled upon, and honestly, it's a very unique approach to it. I stumbled upon somebody who gives a total astronomical approach to the entire chapter and everything that he says. For example, we read that there was a woman in heaven, clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet. And then he goes through and he says, well, the constellation Virgo is a woman, and at some time of the year, the sun is right really where she's at, and then the moon sits below her. And then he went through the entire chapter. And for example, he said she had a head, upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and at certain times of year, these stars are right here. And I mean, he went through a very thorough, what he described as a representation. One of the challenges of it was that the date that all of these things occurred was September the 30th, 2017. And that's what it makes me immediately take a step back from somebody whenever they pin down that something happened on a certain date, right? Because what does the Bible say? That these times are given to God, right? That no man knows some of these times where these things are going to happen. And so anytime somebody says, oh, this is the date when this is going to happen, and we can take September 30th, 2017, and we can extrapolate out, and we can know that. So I immediately said, okay, we'll go to the next YouTube video. I was done with that one. But there are a lot of different approaches to this. You certainly may not agree with everything John MacArthur says, but John MacArthur said the literal approach, I was reading what he had written on this chapter, the literal approach to interpreting Scripture allows for normal use of symbolic language, but understand that it often points to a literal reality. All right, so when we when we read that, we come to the conclusion that when the Bible says there was a great wonder in the heaven that a woman was clothed with the sun, okay, we take and we embrace a literal interpretation of the Bible. But we understand that symbolism is used in writing and in literature. So just because the writer says there's a woman in heaven that's clothed with the sun, it doesn't mean that literally there will be a woman up in the sky who is giving birth to a baby in the sky, right? We understand that that's not literal. That is symbolism. And for example, and I think we'll talk more about this later because I think I may have put it in the notes. For example, if we were to say we're talking about sports and we say, man, the Bills spanked the Dolphins. If we were going to say that, well, if I write that down on a piece of paper and somebody is to read that in 150 years in a totally different cultural context, they go, wow, I don't understand. Maybe there are men named Bill that are exercising punishment on porpoises. Is that what's happening? Is that what's happening? Is that what he wrote about? Well, no, there's symbolic language that within its cultural context we understand, and yet there are things that we look at here and we go, oh, I think maybe this is what this is. So let's kind of just dive into the passage. Now that I've given you a little bit of a caveat here of, these are things that are challenging to be understood, and one day we'll understand them all. When we're in heaven, we'll get it all, and we'll understand it all, and what does that song say? We'll understand it better by and by, and one day. But so here we see a great wonder in heaven. If you look under point number 2, the great wonder is a Semeion mega, a great sign or a great indicator, a big picture, if you will, a great wonder. It's a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. So you see this woman here that is clothed. Now, right away, since we're just a few words into the passage here, right away we're going to get into a divergence. Earlier in church history, now I'm not talking way back in church history, but I'm talking before 150 years ago, sometimes people had a tendency to read the Bible and see the church in every passage. I think more so than now, I think people have moved away from it more, but people were involved in what we would coin or call replacement theology, as if the church had replaced Israel. And so it was more prevalent years ago, but if you pick up, like for example, Matthew Henry in his commentary says that the woman here is the church. And I don't think the woman is the church, but I think the woman is Israel, and we'll talk through it a little bit, but I think the woman is Israel. But there's some divergence here. Okay, I want to be gracious while not trying to be elusive. Does that make sense? I want to be gracious to people without trying to be elusive and not be nailed down. I think that the woman here is Israel, but there are people who love the Lord who say, well, no, the woman is not Israel. The woman is a symbol for this, or is the church, and so we're going to move forward tonight with the woman as Israel. I'll give you a couple reasons why. Let me see if I can pull up my notes on here from my iPad. I think I can. Several reasons why. One is, if you look in Genesis chapter 37, verse 9, actually we'll go there for just a minute. Genesis 37:9. Just hold your place there in Revelation 12. All right. If you look back in Genesis chapter 37, there's some interesting parallels between the woman here and the sun, moon, and the 12 stars, and what the dream that Joseph has back in Genesis chapter 37. In verse 9 it says, he dreamed yet another dream and told it his brethren and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. Now, we know here who his father immediately assumes that this is. So it would be his father, his mother, and the 11 brothers. So being that he's there, you could extrapolate that, okay, maybe there are 12 stars there, his brothers, him. But either way, they're paying obeisance to him. They're worshiping him. And so you look at that, and Jacob immediately says, am I and your mother, are we gonna come bow down ourselves to you? And this dream that he has represents really Israel. Go back to Genesis 37. What is Israel? Israel's totally encompassed within that family. That's Israel. And And so Israel is, at that point in Genesis 37, made up of strictly that family, and will continue throughout throughout the Old Testament to be those people and their seed and their lineage. Another reason I give you why I believe that the woman is Israel is because oftentimes in the Old Testament, God represents Israel as a woman. I didn't write them out for you. If you want to write them onto your notes, I can give you a few of the references really quick. But for example, Isaiah 54, 1 through 6, Jeremiah 3:20, Ezekiel 16:8, and Hosea 2:19 and 20. That's just a sampling, but there are several times, a lot of times in the Bible where God refers to Israel as a woman. And we're going to kind of go with the fact that Israel here is let me give you one more. Let me give you one more reason why I think it's a good analysis to say that we're looking at Israel here. Where did we end in chapter 11? What were we looking at? The temple and the ark. Very Old Testament Jewish terminology and imagery. We see the temple, we see the altar, we see the ark, and then right away you have this woman, and again I think Israel. So there are more reasons, but I think there's a good indicator here. I think you have to take things really a little bit out of context to make the woman be the church. Also because, and this kind of flows directly from that, she's with child. We're going to see when we get down to letter C that this child, I think, represents Christ. Everyone agrees that this child represents Christ, and so it's very logical that Christ doesn't come from the church. Christ came out of Israel, and so the analogy doesn't play out to say that the woman is the church and she conceives and bears Christ. The analogy plays out and works itself out for Israel to be, the woman to be Israel, and then to Christ to come out of Israel. So she's with child. Let's look at the great red dragon. So let's keep reading. Verse 3, and there appeared another wonder in heaven. So you've got this great wonder, and then you've got another wonder. It says, behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. And so you've got, well, let me read verse 4 because that's where we're going to stop talking about the dragon. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So you've got this great red dragon, this destructive creature that we're going to see here in verse 3 and verse 7 and verse 9, called the great dragon. Later on, I don't want to get the cart before the horse, but there's very clear instruction in the passage about who the dragon is in verse 9. It says the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. So there's no doubt here that the dragon that we see in chapter 12 is Satan. All right, so you've got John seeing this great wonder, this great sign in the heavens. And it's a woman who is about ready to have a baby, and she's crying out really in the throes of labor. And now you've got this dragon who has come out and literally is standing ready for this woman to have this baby so he can devour the child. So you've got this great red dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns, 10 crowns. And talks about his tail here, which if you'll allow me, we're just going to go back to that. But when you look at Christ coming out of Israel, what did the devil try to do immediately? Tried to kill him. How so? Through Herod. Yeah, so right away, it was Satan's plan that he would put within the heart of Herod to hate this young boy, this young child, the God-man, so much that Herod was willing to kill all the baby boys in the country. You know, that's some serious hatred for a lot of reasons. Number one, because it's the amount of evil that it takes to murder babies is I can't comprehend. But not only that, but from a logistical and military and economical standpoint, those thousands of babies that you're going to kill, those are going to be your future soldiers. Those are going to be your future farmers. Those are going to be your future workers. So it takes a lot of hatred for somebody to say, I'm just going to kill a generation of babies. But the devil put it within Herod to make every effort to kill the child, to devour the child as soon as it's born. So we see here that you've got the woman we've been introduced to, and now you've got the great red dragon, the dragon that we've been introduced to. And let's just keep going in verse 5. Okay, we may slow down just a little bit because I think it's gonna mandate that we do. So verse 5, let's read verse 5 and 6. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. You know, I don't know of anybody that doesn't at least say, well, this is a symbol of Christ. But what we're talking about is this is Christ. The man-child who's going to rule all nations. We've just come through the Christmas season, and that's one of those prophecies about Christ that we just love to hear as part of that. Those prophecies that the government will be upon his shoulders and his reign will have no end, and that's Christ. That's Jesus, the one who rules all nations. Now, he hasn't ruled all nations to some extent in a material way or in a physical way yet, but he will. Right? When we get to Revelation chapter 17, 18, 19, 20, we're going to go, okay, we're in the millennial reign and Jesus is going to rule all nations and he's going to be the head of all, and then we'll continue to rule all the saints for eternity. And so this here is Jesus. Not only is he going to rule all nations, but it says that he was caught up unto God and to his throne. We've got several passages in the New Testament that talk about Jesus seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Can you think of one? No, I'm asking you on a spur here. Yeah, there is. Yep, the one I was thinking about in Acts 2 is in Acts as well, not in Acts 2. Anybody remember the situation that it surrounds? When he did ascend up in heaven in Acts chapter 1, but I'm thinking about, you remember when Stephen was martyred? Stephen was martyred, and he says, it's like I've seen Jesus seated on the right hand of the throne of God, or it references Jesus being on the right hand of the throne of God there. And we see it in the Old Testament, we see it in the New Testament, and so this clearly is a reference to Christ. Even when he died on this, even when he died on the cross and he was buried and he rose again, you remember that he instructed those ladies in the garden, "Don't touch me. I've got to go up to be with my Father, and I haven't ascended up into heaven yet." And so we know that's where Christ is, and so surely the child is Christ. So let's read verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. If you were here last week, how long is that period of time? 1,260 days. Yeah, that's 3.5 years. That's right. That's 3.5 years. So there are clear references. If you go back to Daniel chapter 7 and chapter 9, if you go back even to what we talked about last week in Revelation chapter 11, there are some very clear instances that those 1,260 days or 3.5 years are just, for some reason, very critical in this tribulation time frame, timeline. And we'll even get into more of that in chapters 14 and 15. But and the woman fled into the wilderness, so she's there for 3.5 years. And it's interesting here, she's there for 3.5 years, and it says she has a place prepared of God that they should feed her there. This is one of these areas where, you read 100 different commentaries about what does this mean, what's going on with Israel during this time frame, and you read 100 commentators, you get 100 different responses about what's happening. The truth is, we can't be 100% certain. I think the big picture is, okay, don't dive into where is the wilderness and who is feeding her and who's providing for her. You're not going to know that. Okay, it's just not in there. And anybody who tells you, well, I've got every detail of it figured out, they're going to tell you stuff that's just not in there. But suffice to say, there is safety and security and provision from the devil, and we're going to get to that again later in the chapter, in just a few minutes. But there is safety, security, and provision from the devil while Israel is in that 3.5-year time frame. God is not, or the devil is not going to be able to harm Israel. So she fled into the wilderness. Now, verse 7 begins talking about this war between the angels, and this is really unique. I mean, this is just a really interesting passage. Let's read it in verse 7. We'll read 7 through 12. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. So let's stop here. The dragon is who? Satan, the devil, right. So Michael, the archangel, and his angels fought against the devil, the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. So there is a war, battle, and where is it located? It's located in heaven. This is where it was kind of funny. I got home just enough time to get ready and eat and then come back up here. And I was finishing up a YouTube video where a pastor was talking about this passage, and I just memorized it so I could repeat it to you. No, I'm just kidding. But I was listening to, and of course the kids are all in there and they're like, Dad, what is, Dad, what? And Kinsley's like, I wish I could hear all this, because like she's kind of into it at this point, And I'm listening to this pastor, and he's talking about this battle and this war in heaven. And he says, some people have a really hard time with the fact that the devil and his angels are going to be in what the Bible calls heaven. And there's a war there. And she said, Dad, how is the devil and the devil's angels going to be in heaven? And we talked about it a little bit, but I said, hey, you don't have to worry about it, because look what happens. They get cast out of heaven. They lose the battle. So they're fighting, the devil and his angels, Michael and God's angels. They're in this battle, and I think this is a physical battle. I don't think there's symbolism here. Well, it doesn't mean they're in a battle. It means they're striving for the souls of men. No, I think this is a physical battle. Because it says after this, they prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. They were in heaven. They were allowed into heaven. People have a hard time with that, but yet it's biblical. You remember what happened in Job? In heaven. It came time, the Bible says in Job, that the sons of God presented themselves to God, and the devil also. That the devil was not banned from the presence of God in heaven. And so I can't wrap my head around it, because we always think of them as, mortal enemies, right? God and the devil, and one day there will be a battle. But it seems to be from Scripture and from this passage that that devil is constantly in the presence of God. I'll give you another. There, yes, we're going to get to that in just a minute too. So that's in this, actually that's in this section. So the dragon and his angels did not prevail. Let's keep reading. I'm going to try to keep reading without stopping and making comment, which is very challenging. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony. They loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Okay, I want to give you what I think is an argument that this passage is not historical. That this is something that is going to come in the future. Now, again, this is not an excuse. This is not me taking a soft stance upon it. I want to be clear that if you leave here going, well, that's not what I always thought, and I'm still not convinced, that's okay. But a couple reasons why I think this is something that's going to happen in the future. It says here that the devil, that they're fighting, he looks in heaven, there was fighting, the war in heaven. This is all happening after he talks about the Israel being protected for 3.5 years, right? So I do think there's obviously this time gap between chapter 5 and 6. That's not unusual in prophetic text, that there would be a time gap. Daniel talks about 70 weeks of years, or 70 time periods of 7, and he explains them as if they were going to happen, boom, 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 boom. And they do, 69 of them. And then you get we don't know how long gap before Daniel's 70th week, where the tribulation begins. Okay, so it's not unusual for there to be a gap. I think there's a gap in between verse 5 and verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, and God hath a place prepared for her. Now, if there wasn't a mentioning of the 1,260 days, you could look at this passage and go, okay, Jesus comes, he's the Messiah. Now you've got Israel kind of in the wilderness. And then you've got this stuff happening at the end time, and then Israel is going to be redeemed, so to speak, those who trust Christ, right? So you might be tempted, but it's unique here that John writes and that God says that Israel is going to be in the wilderness specifically 3.5 years. And so I think the gap is in between verse 5 and verse 6. And now we're talking about what's happening in Israel, or what's happening with Israel, with the Jews during the end times. And then there's this battle in heaven. Now, I'll give you a couple other reasons. Number one, because I think this happens in the future, because it falls after Israel being protected for 3.5 years. Also, because there's a loud voice in verse 10. Now, if you go back, the Revelation tends to point to the loud voice as being the elders. Speaking of a loud voice. I was glad it was the teens, not the nursery, though. So you've got this loud voice, and about 3 times, I think the loud voice is pointing to these 24 elders. Now, so you've got this loud voice that, what does it say? Salvation has come, strength, the kingdom of God. But right before that, it says, the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent, which deceiveth the whole world, and he was cast out into the earth. No, I'm sorry. Hold on. I missed. Sorry, it's at the end of verse 10. Salvation has come, and strength, and the kingdom of our God, the power of Christ. For the accuser of our brethren, which is Satan, is cast down, which accuse them before our God day and night. So, it's another reason why I think this happens during this tribulation time, because I don't think it could have happened at the very beginning, because he's saying the one who has been casting down, or the one who has been accusing the saints, has now been cast down. If we're talking about what happened in the very beginning, before Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, we're talking about the fall of Satan then, he could have never accused any people. Like, there was nobody on the earth to accuse. And so this loud voice says, the serpent is cast down, the dragon is cast down. He's the one who accused the brethren, the saints, before God day and night. And so, a couple reasons why I really think this is something that happens at the end. Some of you would say, well, and I put this in the notes, I think this is the second failure. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. I wanted to call it the second fall, because it kind of is that, but I deleted fall out because I didn't want to be confusing. But I think it's the devil's second defeat. Maybe that would have been a better term, second defeat. If you're interested in where does the Bible even talk about this, because if you read through Genesis, we just start with the serpent, right? Genesis chapter 2, you just start with the serpent there. You don't get this story of how Lucifer fell. If you're interested in where that's at, you go back to Isaiah chapter 14 and Ezekiel chapter 28, right? Those two passages talk about when the devil fell. And they're very poetic in their verbiage as well, but that's where you're at, Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel chapter 28. Okay, so I believe here that this is the second fall. He's cast out, and let's see, it says, verse 8, he didn't prevail, neither was their place found any more in heaven. So he's cast out into the earth. It seems that, and this is, again, my understanding of a passage that is very, very challenging, okay? I'll give you go ahead, Frank.
Well, Luke 10:18, Jesus said, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think that that's already happened.
There's no doubt that Satan fell in the sense that he fell from grace. We would use it that way. Now that's how I would articulate that. I think Satan fell from position, fell from grace, fell out of a relationship, really. And now, because again, you look at this passage and it says, day and night, Satan stands before God and accuses their brethren. You get a lot of this verbiage that we looked at when we talked about the church at Smyrna, how they were persecuted, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony. They loved not their lives unto death. You get some of that same feeling as when we read about some of these churches in Revelation 2 and 3 that continued till the end, and they gave no thought for their own lives. And so I don't think it's gonna be a huge bump in the road one way or the other. If you say, no, this is a historical story talking about what happened when Lucifer originally fell, I think there's some challenges with that, and then you got to figure out how did he accuse the brethren if he's already been kicked out and doesn't have a place in heaven anymore? How does he still stand before God and condemn Job or trip up Job? Kenny, do you have something? Yeah, we called the devil the prince and power of the air. And you look at some of these passages, like, for example, the passage in Job and the passage in Revelation chapter 12. And I get it, out of 66 books, 3 verses is not a lot. But it seems clear that the devil has the ability to be in heaven, to be on the earth, he has that ability. But it seems very clear here that yes, he's influencing things on the earth, and as you get to the end of this conflict, he has no more place, neither was there, not T-H-E-R-E, T-H-E-I-R, there, the devil had no more place in heaven. And so he's kicked out of heaven, and he's kicked to the earth. And it says that they had overcome, and then there's a warning. Okay, worship and a warning in number 2 here under E. Therefore, because this has happened, okay, you see the word therefore, you look back at what it's there for, what happened previous that's affecting what's going to happen now. Therefore, because this has happened, rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Isn't that like ultimate rejoicing? We think about the devil at the beginning of the end. He's lost this battle. He's kicked out of heaven. It's just a matter of time before he is restrained and then ultimately cast into the lake of fire. I mean, like, he's at the end. It even says it right here in verse 12. He knows that he has but a short time. He knows that he's at the end. And maybe you could argue time is different amongst God and angels, but that's another reason why I don't think this is historical. Because now all of a sudden, the devil says, I know I've only got a short time. Now, I know with God 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years. But if this is something that happened really before the first people, or before Adam and Eve sinned anyway, man, I don't know that that's a short time, all of human history. So, anyhow, you've got rejoicing. So you've got worship. You've got rejoicing in heaven by the inhabitants of heaven. But then you've got a woe or a warning to the inhabitants of the earth. He says this, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is coming down unto you, having great wrath. Isn't that something? And I think that's where you get into these last 3.5 years of this tribulation where things just get really bad really quick. And all right, let's see if we can get through the last five verses here. Whoops! Somehow my bullets got off down there on G. But let's start on F here. Satan's attempt to persecute Israel. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. So he goes after Israel. And to the woman, I mean, isn't that kind of a logical next step? Satan goes up into heaven. He thinks he's going to have this battle with his satanic angels and God's angels. And then he loses and he gets cast down to earth. What's the next step? You're like, okay, God, I lost this one. Where are your chosen people at? Where are the people that you love? What does the Bible call Israel? God's beloved. So he says, okay, if I can't win this battle up in heaven with the angels, I'm going to go down and I'm going to persecute Israel. And the Bible says that he goes down to persecute the woman, and it says, to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. All right, so she goes into this place in the wilderness where she's going to be protected, where God protects her, Israel, and she's there for, it's just an interesting way to put this, in a time and times and a half a time. You know, why would you say it that way? It's talking about 3.5 years. A time, so it's what is a year but a set schedule of time. All right, so 1 year and times 2 years, so 1 year and then 2 years, so that's 3, and a half a time, and a half a year, so 3.5. So we're seeing the same thing that we saw in verse 6, just in a different way in verse 14. So Israel is protected from the devil. Verse 15 says, and the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. This is another throw your hands up verse, because I don't know that the Bible gives us enough information and gives us enough indication to say, this is what this flood is. It's a real flood on the earth, or it's a symbol for some other way that the devil's trying to persecute Israel. I don't know. If it is that the children of Israel are being persecuted and God somehow protects them, and maybe in a very physical way, the devil has some form of power over water and causes there to be a flood, and God diverts it. That's possible, guys. It's possible that is a physical, literal thing that happens. It might not be. I don't know. Either way, the devil is trying to persecute Israel, and God thwarts him at every turn. He just can't achieve it. He can't accomplish it. Miss Melanie. Yeah, I was listening to, maybe I was reading an article about, I think it was Chuck Smith, and that was his argument. He said, I don't think this is a physical flood of water. He said, I think it is a flood of wickedness, of hatred, of violence, so much so that Israel is going to be protected by God from it, and God is going to kind of swipe away this violence and move it into other places. We don't know. It's entirely possible that is what we're going to see there. Okay, let's look at the last point here as we draw. 8:02. Let's look at the last point here as we draw to our last few minutes. It's in the last verse. And the dragon was wroth with the woman. So now we've got, he's having great wrath. The devil has great wrath in verse 12, and now he's wroth again in verse 17. He just can't get victory, which is great. He goes and tries to have this war with God's angels, and he fails, and he's cast down to earth. He tries to persecute Israel, and he fails. And then he says, okay, I'm going to turn my attention to who? The dragon was had wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. Now, this is very interesting, because if we've already said the woman is Israel, who could be the remnant of the woman's seed? You've cheated because I put it on the paper already. I think the remnant of the woman's seed is the first reference that we have to what we would call the church, but I'm going to call it tribulation saints. It's those people who, the Bible says that now we're not the same, we don't replace Israel, but the Bible says that we're grafted into the seed of Abraham. So when we think about those who have trusted Christ during the tribulation, those who are going to be on the earth during the tribulation, it's not a far stretch to say, well, the remnant of the woman's seed, now if the woman's seed was Christ, and we are really, as believers, brothers and sisters of Christ, then we would be the remnant of Israel's seed, of the woman's seed. Meditate on that, mull over that. But I think here's an argument for it. Number one, it says they keep the commandments of God. And number two, it says they have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, although Christ came out of Israel, no Jew is saying, no Jew who's not a Messianic Jew, I guess I should stipulate that, is saying that Jesus is the Messiah. They don't have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, who has the testimony of Jesus Christ? I do. We do. Now, we're not going to be here. My opinion is we're going to be gone. We're going to be raptured out. So who are those who are the remnant of the seed of the woman? Those who have come to know Christ during the tribulation, those tribulation saints that we talked about in Revelation chapter 7, that have come from every tribe and every kindred and every place, And I think the 144,000 are evident as we look at chapter 11. We've talked about the two witnesses, and chapter 12, and get into chapter 13. And I think they fit into that picture. Now, whether you say, okay, well, they're Israel, because they are Jewish, or whether you say, well, they understand, they've been enlightened that Jesus is the Messiah, so they're tribulation saints. So whatever you grasp to in verse 17, if you say those who are persecuted here, the remnant of the seed, those are the 144,000. Yes, those are ones who have the testimony of Christ. If you say those are Gentiles from every nation in the world who have the testimony of Christ and accept, yes, maybe. Whoever they are, whether they're the 144,000 or whether they're the tribulation saints, and I would really maybe, although the Bible clearly differentiates the 144,000, I would really say when you look at the definition of who these people are, they keep the commandments of God and they have the testimony of Jesus Christ. I would say, well, that could apply to both. Okay, so I don't know. Did you leave with more questions than you came with? Maybe. That's a chapter, isn't it? I love the first 7 chapters of Revelation. And I love the last 3 chapters or 4 chapters of Revelation. All these ones in the middle are hard. And so, anyway,